I do believe that ignoring that this is a possibility is part of that problem, because I think more people deal with these types of parasitic infections than we want to realize. Hello and welcome to Sage and Stone Homestead. If you have not met me yet, my name is Heather, and I tried to not string you guys along by giving you a title that was not clickbait. I definitely had worms, and I really want to talk about it. It has been, I think, around 2 months at this point since I did deworm myself, and I am worm free, and I want to talk about this because I feel like even if it's a little bit embarrassing for me, the result of not dealing with that burden has been so life-changing that it's all worth it. And I think that those of us that dig in the dirt and deal with animals on a daily basis, especially in the United States where this kind of thing isn't talked about often, it's a little bit taboo, this is an important conversation for us to have. It is true that there are worms that do not cross between species, so not every worm is gonna be able to live in the body of like a dog, for example, and in the body of a cat, and vice versa, or like a ruminant worm may not live in the body of a human. But the truth is, some of them can, and it actually is, especially in a homestead setting, pretty easy to get exposed. Now, I want to say that you don't necessarily have to have a farm to have these exposures. Any kind of exposure to animals. There are things like hookworms that cats and dogs carry, and they just pick it up in the soil from other cats and dogs, and they can pass it on to you, especially if you have children. Children can be a lot more in the dirt than adults can, and they can just be a little less conservative with their personal space, if you will. And so families with pets and small children, the whole family could be exposed to worms pretty quickly, and you may not know what's going on. I didn't know exactly what was going on until we were, talking in hindsight about it, where the only thing I did was handle the worms, and my entire life got better. It really did. So I didn't talk about it much on the channel. Throughout the years, I have kind of given you guys little snippets, like when I've needed to take a break and whatnot, little tiny snippets of my health journey. And I'm not in bad health by any means, but I haven't been in perfect health, and it's something that I've been navigating somewhat openly, especially with our membership here. I've been bouncing things off of the Discord wall and stuff that's been going on. And anyways, let me just start at the beginning. And really, the beginning of our journey with homesteading and exposure to things like goats and a lot of gardening really did coordinate and correlate with the pandemic, with COVID. And so some of the earlier symptoms that I dealt with that I feel like were also, or could also have been attributed to a worm burden, could also have been through something like COVID, because I did have COVID twice. I lost my sense of smell for a little while, and when I got it back, it was messed up for about 18 months. A lot of things that should have smelled bad, like BO and other bodily functions, they all smelled like garlic scrambled eggs to me for 18 months. It was bizarre. But anyways, aside from that, the first symptoms that I felt like, in hindsight, that could have been related to worms was a shortness of breath. And again, that could have been contributed to or attributed to COVID. A lot of stuff that I'm going to say could be attributed to other things, which is why I'm not entirely sure that they weren't, overlapping conditions, if you will. But I want to mention them anyway. It would be something stupid simple, like I would put a 50-pound feed bag over my shoulder, which is quite common and normal for me around here, and walk from my car to the barn and literally have to take a break in the middle of that. And right now I'm a little bit heavy. Back in 2020 I really wasn't, and so it was kind of strange that I experienced that. And I noticed it a lot because I have been making videos of our farm life for many years at this point, that there was a point where I couldn't even really walk and talk to the camera without getting shortness of breath, to the point where I had to stop. And you guys never saw it because I edited it out, but I would just stop and go, like, get a breath, have to get a breath, like deprived of oxygen type feeling. Also, there was a point where my hair started thinning, and I do think that there was a correlation with that and an ingredient that was in the shampoo that we were buying, because as soon as I stopped using that shampoo and started making my own, my hair started growing back. So I don't know if that was necessarily related, but a lot of little things that I changed did make minor improvements, at least for a small amount of time. And so that's why it was kind of hard to figure out what was going on. But I have a whole list. This whole list of things that I was dealing with, I literally no longer deal with anymore. One of the things I have on here, which was also one of the first symptoms that I noticed, was rashes. Now, I kind of can be rash prone anyway. I can get a yeasty rash around my knees, especially in garden time when I've got my knees in the soil. I notice that a lot, and you know, it's short season, things like that. But every spring, and it does correlate with the buttercup that comes up, I get these rashes on my feet because I'll cut the grass and then walk through the freshly cut grass with buttercup in it, and there's a sap on the inside of the wild ranunculus or the buttercup it does cause blisters. And so I do think that some of those rashes could have been the buttercup, but I also think that maybe it's possible that one of these times there also could have been some hookworm larvae crawling into my feet, because I can remember a time where some of the rashes that I had were so insanely itchy that it was almost unbearable. I had tons of people sending me all of these like jewelweed salves and things to help with the rashes and everything. And so with the shortness of breath and rashes, this is how I think it relates to worms. I keep going back to hookworm, because hookworm, when I looked up the symptoms of hookworm infection in people, it all sort of clicks together in kind of a creepy way. And so what can happen is, let's say your dog has hookworm and your dog, you know, poops in the grass, as dogs do. And even if you pick it up, there can be a little bit, you know, left behind. And the eggs, a lot like, you know, the worms and things that infect goats, the eggs are out on pasture, they can hatch, and the little larva moves up on the grass blades. And with goats, they can ingest that larva, and then the cycle continues. With something like hookworm and people, you could be walking around in like flip-flops, or my kids walk around all the time with like bare feet, and the hookworm can actually burrow through the skin and get in that way and travel through your tissues, which itches like crazy. And if you had, you know, a poison ivy rash or a buttercup rash alongside of that, you might not know that you also had a worm crawling in. Now, the reason that I think that this was worm related, or could be one of the entry points for worms, there's many different ways that I could have gotten worms, and we'll go over that. Really not long after that was like the shortness of breath symptom, and also intense bouts of coughing. I mean, coughing and coughing and coughing, to the point where I was losing control of my bladder because I was coughing so much. I have had 4 children, and I mean, I would cough for an entire month and nobody around me was getting sick. So it didn't seem like it was related to any kind of virus or bacterial, at least nothing contagious to my family. It would just be me coughing my brains out. My eyes would hurt, my diaphragm would hurt, all of my, you know, abdominal muscles would hurt just from coughing for like a month straight. And that was a pretty common thing for me to deal with almost every spring. It got to the point too where every spring, as soon as we started to heat up here, I would know that I'm going to start getting my dizzy spells. They started around the same time as a lot of the other symptoms, and they're in the beginning where I couldn't really be outside after a certain point, or else it kind of came on fast where I just felt like I was gonna pass out. I never did pass out, but it would be this very quick, like, oof, like I would catch myself like, did I just fall asleep kind of thing. And I know it sounds crazy, but every spring from like 2021 until what I thought was going to be this year, but I haven't experienced it this year, hallelujah, I would feel these spells come on whenever the heat started to come on. And it was to the point where it was hard to function outside. It was kind of scary to function outside. It was to the point where sometimes I would ask Levi to follow me around while I was doing chores, just to like talk to me in case something happened. I told the kids, like, hey, if mommy passes out and I'm not waking up, you need to run to the neighbor and get someone. You need to get some help. Like, this might happen. So, I mean, that's probably good to tell kids anyways, but this was a serious, like, this might happen kind of thing. And it was scary, and I did not like experiencing it. However, I will say too, it wasn't necessarily me being out in the heat. I did associate these dizzy spells or near passing out spells with the heat, because they came on around the same time every year. But also, I could be inside all day, like in the kitchen or sitting at my computer in the air conditioning, and experience these spells. I would experience them just sitting down, standing up, laying down helped some, but I could even feel them when I was laying down. So I went through all kinds of possibilities of what I could be dealing with at the time. I thought I had POTS. I thought I had low blood sugar. I thought all these things. And like really nothing worked well for those spells. I did have a time where I was like drinking Propel like crazy, and I felt like a lot of electrolytes was helping me, but I don't really know. In hindsight, my theory is, the cycle of the worms. I know that in my goats, now I understand goats are not the same internal construct as humans, but in goats, worms go through cycles. And they can have a dormancy cycle over winter in your body, or in the body of a goat as well. And they can bloom in the springtime when the conditions are right. My theory is every spring they would go through this cycle where they would bloom, I would cough like crazy, and then I would get dizzy because maybe there was a lot of worms in my body taking up blood. And I was probably getting anemic every spring. And I mean, this was years ago that I first noticed these symptoms and this pattern, and didn't really have a concrete thing to attribute it to. Nothing really made sense. It's not that I was eating a certain thing that would cause it, or not drinking enough water, which, I mean, it's kind of a fact of life for me anyways, but it always has been, so it's not like it was strange for me to not be staying super hydrated, but it never has been a big giant deal. So it didn't seem like that was part of it. But yeah, after a couple of years of this, I got to where it was pretty predictably going to be dizzy and having dizzy spells in springtime. Last year was really hard. Last year I experienced a lot of the dizzy spells and a lot of shortness of breath, chest pain, and it got to the point as well where I felt like I could literally fall asleep anywhere. You could set me in the middle of the highway and give me a pillow, or maybe even not, and I would fall asleep, and I would probably sleep like a rock. So exhausted no matter what. And part of it, I think, is I was not getting good quality of sleep at that time as well. I would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning ready to take on the world. I had a hard time falling asleep. I was tossing and turning like crazy, just because, almost like I had restless leg syndrome or something, just very poor quality of sleep, which I think was translating into just extreme exhaustion during the day. And this was again when I thought maybe I've got blood sugar problems. So I got into the routine of writing down what I was eating and taking my blood sugar frequently, and there was really nothing super abnormal there. Last year, I keep looking down because I'm looking at my cheat sheet. It was hard to remember all of the things that were a problem not that long ago, but I was dealing with pretty intense joint pain last year as well, especially in my knees. It was hard to sit up and do all the things that I like to do. I'm a pretty active person, as you guys know, and like squatting down, getting up from sitting and things like that, my knees were like on fire. Felt like, I don't know, arthritis possibly, but very intense pain in my knees, in my hips, which I do have a hip problem anyways, because one of my children, my last child, he sat on this hip for basically the entirety of the pregnancy, and I had a lot of nerve pain and things with that. But it was worse. Like, all of my joint pains that I had were really bad last year, and a little bit into this year before I dewormed myself. When I was dealing with the intense, super intense exhaustion, I started taking a couple different supplements to make up for what I thought was like a nutritional imbalance. There's something that I'm not getting for whatever reason. We eat very well for the most part. Do we eat junk sometimes? Absolutely. Actually, every week we have what's called Junk Food Friday, where we'll get like Tostinas, pizza rolls, and pizzas, and that is what we eat. But for the most part, we actually eat a lot of goodness straight from our farm. I have a goal of every meal needs to have at least one farm thing in it, and most of the time, the entire meal is made up of farm things, or the vast majority of it, like 80% of it, will be farm related, and it's good stuff. Like, I make all of my rice and things with bone broth. We have, you know, our fresh meats here from our farm, the fresh veggies from our farm, fermented foods, raw dairy, things like that, like good stuff. I could not figure out why I would have these nutritional gaps, but when I would supplement, I felt pretty good, at least temporarily. So I did a liver supplement. I talked about that on camera recently. I felt really good on the liver supplement. I've freeze-dried some of our own livers from our goats and things, and I think that's good no matter what. I'm not saying that these things aren't good to keep in your regular diet, but I also couldn't understand why I was dependent on them with the way that we eat. I got some different tinctures for like adrenal fatigue. I got that mushroom powder that I still really like that Kaylee with the Homestead puts out. That is a good supportive for like the adrenals and things, and a hormone balancer. Because another thing that I considered is I am 37. We established in one of the recent videos, I forgot again, but I'm getting a little bit up there in age as far as like the cycles go, and so I thought maybe I'm entering perimenopause, which still, like, these things can happen together, you know? So a lot of these things would help a lot for a short window of time, and then I would crash again and feel like I needed more support and more support and more support, and I could not understand why my body wasn't hanging on to these things, except, and this is the part where it might get a little bit TMI, but I'm gonna tell you, I'll say it nicely. In goats, we call it scouring. I was scouring 9 times a day, every day, for a long time. And I was actually shocked that I wasn't losing weight, but I could basically tell through certain evidence, I'm trying to be vague here, that whatever I was eating was not staying in my body for long before my body ejected it. And it was bad enough where it does not take me very long to milk the goats. It might take an hour, and that's if I'm really dawdling. And I would have to take a break in the middle of milking to come inside, do my business, and then go back out and hope that I could make it back in time to use the bathroom again and not have to take 2 breaks during milking. It was really bad. It was like ruining my quality of life, my need for the bathroom all the time. It was hard. There were days where I felt like I couldn't leave the house because what if I needed a bathroom? I needed to know that I could be somewhere comfortable in case I needed to use the bathroom. And my grandmother has Crohn's, and so I thought maybe I have Crohn's disease. I don't know. But it made sense that my body would be needing all of this excess nutrition if things were just moving through so fast that nothing could be absorbed. And it also makes sense where if I'm having that experience several times a day, why I would be exhausted, and why no matter what I would eat, my blood sugar wouldn't go up very much. I would eat and eat and eat, and my blood sugar just stayed. It was weird. It didn't matter what I ate. My blood sugar would stay decently low. There was one time, and the members will probably remember this because I talked about this in Discord when I was going through it, that I wrote down what I ate. I ate a really good lunch, and I think it was an hour and a half or 2 hours after I ate, my blood sugar was 65. It was really low. And it's not that I had a carb-free lunch. If I remember right, it was like turkey, fermented green beans. Maybe it was a melon. I think I had a melon, like a whole armpit melon with lunch that day. That's what it was. Yeah, so I had like a piece of fruit, and I expected my blood sugar to go up, but it didn't. However, I will say I felt really good after that meal. Like, my blood sugar was low, but I felt amazing. Can't explain it. Along the same lines of needing the bathroom frequently, I was drawing a little bit of a parallel there at a certain point with me eating citric acid and a more frequent need to use the bathroom. It didn't matter what it was. Like, I could have eaten pasta with sauce that I canned, and I had put in citric acid in order to properly acidify it for home canning, as you do. And not long, like maybe 20 minutes after having the food or the drink with, normal amounts of citric acid, I would be in the bathroom. And so that's just something that I noticed, but I will say that's something that has gone away since getting rid of the worms. The food sensitivity has gone away. So during all of this time, we have two practitioners that we go to. They're both chiropractors, and they both have different scopes of care. One of the chiropractors works with a nurse practitioner, and so we've got them as, a medical point of contact. And we also have a different chiropractor that we see a couple times a month. And it's funny, he was kind of joking with me when I would, ask him about, hey, I'm experiencing this. What do you think? And he's like, well, you've told me you do fecals on your goats with your microscope. Have you done a fecal on yourself before? And he's like half joking, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I probably don't want to know what's going on, but also, like, I feel like I would have to burn all of my stuff if I did that. Like, I don't even want to think about what that collection thing would look like. But also, this other doctor that works with a nurse practitioner, they've drawn my blood before. The blood work came back great. This was a couple of years ago. I feel like if I had my blood drawn last year, it would be less great. Maybe I would have shown some anemia, I'm not sure. But I was feeling really trashy last year, towards the end of last year, and a little bit towards the beginning of this year. But a couple of years ago, my blood work was fine, and they had talked about wanting to send in a fecal as like a next step to try to figure out what was wrong. And the fecal for humans was $600, which we can afford, but I'm like, ugh, let me try some other things before we go that route. Let me try to knock out what I feel like I can before we go ahead and do that. And I was just thinking, well, what are they going to be even looking for in the fecal? And then I remembered what the other chiropractor said. He wanted me to check myself for worms. And I'm like, well, why don't I just kind of do some research, see how common this might even be, and then go from there. Maybe I'll just treat myself for worms, and we'll see what happens. And so in my research, I learned, and I didn't know this because this isn't something that we talk about often here in the United States at all. It's very common for people in other countries to do like a deworming protocol like 1 or 2 times a year. And there are readily available dewormers for humans that you can get on places like Amazon. And I got really excited when I figured that out, because I thought I would have to be going through a few hoops. Like, I could have gotten them through my doctor who works with a nurse practitioner, the like prescription anthelmintics, oh my gosh, that. I could get that through the doctor, through a prescription. Or you can find stuff like this on Amazon. And I can remember having pinworms as a kid. I remember having worms as a kid. And I was like, well, if I had worms as a kid, I've got kids now. What if my kids have worms? And what if I got worms from them? And I just went down this whole rabbit hole one day. Ordered this stuff, as well as like a liquid form of it. It's Pyrentel, which you can find this type of drug for things like livestock, but this is for human use. I believe it's made in Australia. Really common for people in other countries to treat themselves for worms. A lot less common in the United States, and I find it interesting. There are a lot of things wrong with the United States and our healthcare. There just is. and our food system and all that. I do believe that ignoring that this is a possibility is part of that problem, because I think more people deal with these types of parasitic infections than we want to realize. And you could have an entire list. I'm gonna cry. I knew it. It is possible to have an entire list of symptoms that you don't have to deal with anymore. Just taking care of a parasitic infection. And when I thought about it, because I had to wait 2 days for this to show up from Amazon. I was thinking about it. I have had goats that I've taken to the vet before that have had a couple issues. I've talked about it recently. I took Margie to the vet because she was scouring after she had her babies, which was, you know, a stressful event for the goats. It's not uncommon for them to get some kind of worm bloom or something after they have babies. And she had coccidia real bad, which is not super common for an adult goat. She was 4 years old at the time. She had coccidia real bad. The only thing the vet treated her for was the worms. And once Margie's body wasn't dealing with the worm load, she got better. And honestly, Margie has never gotten worms again. Like, she probably has worms, but her body is handling them really well right now. So we gave her the leg up by deworming her and getting all of her other systems in order. And she was able to handle the coccidia on her own as goats of that age should. So, and I was thinking, well, if I've got worms, what is my body unable to handle and get on top of while it's working on this worm infection that it's probably been working on for years, looking back on it. So kind of gross. But, so we got this. We took it after dinner. It comes in these little, there's only one little wee chocolate square in here, but there's instructions on there of how much each person takes. They suggest that you treat the whole family. This is what it looks like, a little square chocolate. And because very likely, especially if there's kids involved, you know, if you have worms, it's easy for you to pass it on. It just is. It's just how close family relations work. You don't have to be that close, but you know, if you're living in the same spaces and preparing food and whatever in the same spaces, it would not be uncommon for people to pass worms from person to person, especially when there's kids in the house. So yeah, we treated ourselves. I knew that it could be a bad couple of days, and it was. I spent a lot of time on the toilet, but I was already kind of used to that. I didn't feel super great. And I know I'm going to be getting this question. Did I notice anything come out? Yep, I did. Now, nothing that I was like definitive, that is what I think it is. But I looked and I said, I think that's what I think it is. Because they say that some of them, the worms, when they die, your body can just kind of break them down because they're in your digestive tract. So your body will digest them as they die. But there was some things that had me scratching my head and wondering if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing, and I think I was, but they were dead. And I also saw some things that I thought were maybe little egg capsules, and I looked up pictures of things to kind of contrast and compare, and yeah, I think I did see some coming out, but I swear it was within those 2 days I felt remarkably better. And you know what, there's a couple of things that I did not mention. One of the big major issues over the last year and a half that I had when dealing with worms, and I wasn't sure wasn't related to long COVID, I will say that, but in hindsight I know that it was not, was very, I want to say very intense, but it almost made me depressed to know that I was having memory issues. And not just because I'm scatterbrained, okay? Everybody who's been on a member's live stream knows that I'm scatterbrained. I leave things places, I forget. I'm just very, maybe ADD, I don't know. I haven't been formally diagnosed. But one of the main issues was I had a hard time following stories. Like what would happen is my husband would try to explain to me, hey, for an example, like I'm going to build the barn extension and it's gonna look like this, and he would just talk me through what it was gonna look like without showing me, and I literally could not picture it in my mind. And if he was telling me like a longer story, by the time he got to the end I forgot the beginning and I could not follow, and it was scary. And I could tell, like my conscious mind could tell that I wasn't keeping up. Like I knew that I wasn't keeping up. And it reminded me of my mom had a TBI, gosh, it was probably 7 years ago at this point. During some of her testing that they did at the hospital, they'd like hold up a red crayon. Holly, what color is this? she would just look, like she'd have this very intense, like, I know what it is. And she'd tell the doctors, I know. But she couldn't spit the word red out of her mouth. And when she recovered, she'd say, I just couldn't make my mouth do it. It's called aphasia. That's kind of what this felt like. Like, I could tell that I wasn't right, but there's nothing I could do about it. And that is completely gone. Like, my brain fog, my lack of attention, my inability to follow a story and to like keep up, that's gone. And it came back very quickly after I got rid of the worms. And also, something that I didn't realize I was missing out on this whole time is I started dreaming again, like at night, because I was actually sleeping. I had forgotten that I hadn't dreamt in I don't know how many years. But now I'm dreaming every night. I guess I'm getting into that good REM sleep or whatever, where you are actually able to get good rest. And I'm dreaming and I'm remembering the dreams, and that's something that used to be quite common. Like, I've been a dreamer literally at night my whole life, and I hadn't realized that I hadn't dreamed until I was dreaming again, which is, it's just insane. So yeah, I don't want to make this video to kind of tell you what to do, but to give you some encouragement. If this is something that you feel like you may be dealing with, bring it up with your doctor. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to play one on TV, but my doctors kind of helped lead me in this direction. And I think that it's a good conversation for you and your doctor to have, you and your family to have. If you've got this like myriad of symptoms and you can't figure out what's going on, I mean, it could be some things, right? It really could be something other than the worms. But if your body isn't having to deal with parasites to begin with, your body may be able to better handle the other things that are coming at it. Like I said, I can have citric acid now. I'm actually in the middle of making elderflower cordial right now. It's right here. The recipe for elderflower cordial has citric acid in it, and I can have this again. There was some time where I had to give up my elderflower cordial so that I would go to the bathroom less and not dehydrate myself fully. But yeah, at this point, it doesn't matter. I can have citric acid, because whatever my body didn't want to deal with the citric acid, it can deal with now, that it's not also trying to deal with a pretty massive worm burden. Another thing that I noticed when very soon after I got the worms out of my body is I was starting to have a hard time cutting my own toenails. I mentioned this in the beginning of the video. I am a bigger lady, and I know that. But, you know, as long as I can move around and do well the things that I want to do on my farm and I feel good, I'm not super worried about it. But over this past winter, I was noticing that it was actually getting to be pretty difficult for me to cut my toenails. And I sit on a chair normally and put like my foot in my lap in order to cut my toenails. And that was hard. That was very easy within a week of getting rid of the worms. And I was reading online that some of these parasitic infections can cause an inflammation and almost like water retention inside of your gut. So like from the inside, not necessarily from the outside, because yeah, some of that is fluff for sure, but from the inside, the inflammation was less so that I could breathe better and I could move better. And I could cut my toes, and I didn't even realize I was cutting my toes without a struggle until I was basically through all of my toes. Now, how did I get worms? I don't know exactly. I do work very closely with goats. I do have dogs. I do have cats. I've had cats my whole life. I do use the goat's manure in things like the garden. Really just being in contact with animals and their manure and with soil at all. I was reading that there's actually a decently zoonotic, I think it was also a hookworm, but there's a decently zoonotic worm that can pass pretty easily between cows and people. And I don't know how all of these, you know, facilities work with making things like black cow bagged soil and all the other bagged soils that we have, but I mean, I think it's possible that even if you don't have any animals or children at all, but you're buying in bagged soils, I don't think it's impossible for worms to come in from cow manure, from bagged soils. If the possibility exists at all, and maybe you're however old and you've never thought about the fact that you might have worms on board, it's something to think about. It's something that you now can't unsee now that you've seen it. It's something that we don't talk about a lot in the United States, and I think we should. And if you have some experience that you'd like to share to encourage other people, maybe you live in a different country, maybe you live in a place like Australia and you do something like this periodically, please share down below if you feel like you want to. Obviously, don't put out any information that you don't want to share into the world, but if you feel led to share, please do. I think it will help encourage other people. It is a very gross and scary thing to think about, what could be hitching a ride in your body and wreaking havoc, but I tell you, once they're gone, it's life-changing.